Hello, everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel. Welcome to today's episode number 84 of the Jeet Kune Do Dialogues. As you're logging in, if you'd be kind enough to say where you're logging in from and hit the like button, and feel free to continue doing so throughout the episode. Especially if I have Stan or I happen to say anything that you find particularly insightful, we welcome the feedback and the comments. My guest today is a guy. Well, I'll let you hear how he and I must have met, because I'm not too sure on the years. But this is episode number 84 of the Jeet Kune Do Dialogues with Stanley Brooks, one of the lost boys of St. Louis Combat Jeet Kune Do. Okay, all right. Now we're cooking.
All right, okay.
Okay, now we're cooking. Sorry about that.
No problem, no problem.
What's happening, buddy? How are you?
Well, you know how life goes. It gets interesting each day.
Yeah, I never had that happen to me with Zoom before. So tell me how come you are familiar with Zoom?
Well, I belong to this organization called Human and Universal Energy.
Okay.
So I began teaching the classes, I would say, well, I began earlier, but I would say about 6 years ago, we started holding our classes on Zoom. So it was a requirement then for me to download Zoom and to conduct the meditation healing classes.
So that's what it is. Human. What's it called again? Human and
HUE, Human and Universal Energy.
Okay. And it's a meditation class?
It's meditation and also energy healing. So the backstory of that is pretty fascinating. It was like when I was introduced, it was like a major U-turn. Because I was introduced by another martial artist who was Vietnamese, and we just happened to cross paths, and he just offered to teach me healing, and one thing led to another, and I started taking classes, and I said, you know what, this is pretty interesting material here, and plus it works. So
right, yeah.
That's time.
That's interesting, because remember back in the old days when Inasana would tell us about the 12 areas of Kali. And then he would always mention area 12, you know, and I don't know about you, but I never had any experience with it as such, like in learning anything about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because I've had martial arts friends of mine offer to teach me like herbs, but it was so, you know, stretched out, and it was so complicated that I lost interest, you know.
Right.
But this I know was just meant to be my destiny, because the way it happened was very strange. He came to sit in on one of my Kali classes at a karate school that I was teaching at, and I only teach class at this place maybe every other 2 months. So for him to come there that particular day and sit in,
right,
and then afterwards introduce himself and give me the opportunity to learn, I know it just had to be fate.
He was there for your class in particular, or he was just there at the school?
He was on a bicycle that day, on that particular day that I was at class at the school teaching. And like I said, it was a friend of mine who was taking Kali, karate instructor who was a friend of mine. So he had me teach a Kali class at his karate school. But I think that was only the second or third time, and it was only months in between. So for this guy to show up that time, it's really a
wow.
Yeah.
Do you have other synchronicities like that in your martial arts story?
Yeah, I've had many that I think the way I started off, because you know Ken and I are good friends, Ken O'Neill. In East St. Louis, where I grew up, well, I grew up in Centerville, but East St. Louis is just a little west. There's practically nothing. There's very few recreational centers. There's only one karate school. So one day I heard about this guy teaching Kung Fu. And I thought it was interesting because he actually pronounced it and spelled it with a G.
Right.
So I came to check him out, and he was teaching at the elementary school. It's called Lily Freeman. So there were about 50 people in this gymnasium. He was conducting class, and I said, wow, this guy moved with so much finesse and so much grace, speed, and power. The only person I had seen close to that was like Bruce playing Kato on the Green Hornet.
Right.
I was like really intrigued, you know, and I think it was 1 or 2 weeks later I went to learn. And it was funny because when I went to learn, there was only about 6 people there. So I'm looking around and said, where did everybody go?
Yeah. What was the difference in setting?
Yeah, it was a total difference in setting. And, you know, this guy, well, his name is Mike Stanley. He was very unique because he had a training, and he was in the Air Force, and he had training in Chinatown, Boston. There's some type of school whereby he only referred to it as the Chinatown Boston School. He would never give any type of information on the background of the school, the location of it, the ranking, the teaching curriculum. But he said it was very different because they sort of like streamlined Kung Fu to address street fighting. Right. All the kicks were low. All the blocking was pretty much a combination of classical movement plus Western boxing. And I never seen anything like that. And that was what really intrigued me. But his approach, particularly since he was an ex-police officer in St. Clair County in Illinois, was really sort of what I call reality combat, because everything that we approached was geared for street fighting.
Right.
And he had a very, what I would call, keen insight into the psychology of combat. He was highly articulate because he was the editor of his college bi-monthly magazine. So I would ask the guy to really submit articles to like Black Belt and Inside Kung Fu, because everyone was pretty well technique oriented, and he was more psychologically oriented. Plus, in terms of the training itself, the technical approach, he was very practical. But he had no interest in submitting, you know, articles or his experience. But I was, you talk about, you know, synchronicities. I think that was a major synchronicity in me wanting to learn something that's really functional, and effective, and just run cross paths with him.
Yeah. Now, for people who might not be familiar with Mike Sandlin, did you ever find out anything more about the Boston thing, like the origin of it, or what have you? Because Mike ended up, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike ended up being encouraged by Inosanto to write a book on his whole approach, correct?
Correct. That is correct.
So in Boston, this streamlined Kung Fu approach, did it have anything at all do you know if it had anything at all to do with Bruce Lee?
I don't think so directly. However, I'm quite sure it was influenced. Yeah. Okay, because it was sort of one of those, it was not totally underground, but it was one of those operations that didn't cater to, I think, like a wide audience.
Right.
To give you an example, when Mike went and he first inquired about training, they gave him a fighting experience. They actually put about 9 people and simulated an attack where there was chairs, there was like an environment of tables and so forth. And he said, well, basically he lost. He got kind of beat up. Not seriously, but he lost the fight. That was his first lesson. So you can imagine coming to a martial arts school and inquiring about the class and wanting to be accepted as a student. And then they put you in a fighting environment and they have guys jump on you.
Yeah.
And so,
that'll test your intentions, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But he came back. He was very resilient. Plus, he was stubborn. So he came back, and finally, I think he said he lost the second fight too. But then the third time, they accepted him. I think because of his persistence.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, but they didn't cater to a wide appeal. So I think they tried to keep everything, you could say, on the down low, where they didn't advertise. It was only by word of mouth. That's my impression. That's my impression of it. But like I say, I think it's from there that we made the JKD connection, because I know Ken probably already touched upon this. The senior student, which was Carlton James, who I never even saw come to class. At that time, we trained 5 nights a week. And when it was warm, we trained maybe 6 days a week on Saturdays. And I trained with Mike for, I think it was a straight year and a half. And I never met Carl James. I only missed 2 classes during that period. And they said Carl came in on one of the classes that I missed. What the luck.
Right.
So I could never see a before and after.
Yeah.
Scenario.
Well, I probably saw Carl James more than you then, because I used to see him in LA all the time.
I know, yeah, you probably did. uh,
And Ken said that that was a deliberate decision to send him out to LA to train with Inosano and then bring that information and that training back to St. Louis.
yeah, to East St. Louis, which is on the Illinois side.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from Mike's explanation, he said they were following very closely the first two articles that Bruce published in Black Belt magazine. So they found that there was a parallel between what Bruce was trying to promote,
Right.
realistic street fighting, and what Mike was doing in East St. Louis.
Right.
So they decided among them, either one of them needed to go. So Mike decided that Carl should go to learn and then bring the material back.
Yeah.
But Carl said he wrote Guru Inosano a letter of acceptance prior to this, and Guru sent back and replied that if you're willing to travel halfway across the country to learn, then we'll accept you. Because at that time, Guru Dan was training in the backyard. They didn't have a school at that particular time. I remember it's called explained to us.
So, okay, so this was before 74 then?
This was in 72, either late 71 or early 72.
Yeah. Huh. I wonder if years later when Jay D'Amato got in touch with Inosano, if the fact that he was from St. Louis, I wonder if that played any part in it, in his, Inosano agreeing to do CMAA. What do you think?
I think it was partly that, but I also heard Carl tell me personally that he talked to Guru himself to kind of get more motivation in coming.
Okay. Okay.
Because you can imagine the advantage of us having Dan accessible to us. Come true, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So people have heard, I mean, because I've talked about it myself, but then I spoke with Ken and now I'm talking to you. So people who pay attention will know that CMAA moved home to St. Louis from LA in 1984. Now, did I meet you then? Or did I meet you in 85? Or did you ever come over to the university during the camps?
Not in California, no.
Okay, but you were there in St. Louis?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So that's where we probably met. But then, when I was talking to Ken, I came out to visit on my own. And now, where were we training? Because there was a training session that I attended. Where were we?
Well, at that time I'm not quite sure, because you sent me a photo recently of you, myself, and Guru Inosano. Was that the one you sent me recently?
Yeah. So that's the one that I used in the middle of the postcard.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because I saw, because there's not that much available for you off the internet. Right. So usually what I do is I'll put like the person's logo or something in the center of the postcard. But I thought with you, I'll just show people my connection to Stan Brooks. So there's the picture of me, you, and Inosano. But that's at Jim Smothers' school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's Baldwin, and I want to say that was it was 88, but I could be wrong. It might have been 86. I want to say it was 88, but now that I think about it, it might have been 86 or so.
Well, the funny thing is that when I was looking at that photo, I could not remember the setting. I'm looking at the walls, the front. Yeah. So what is this? I know it wasn't CMAA, but yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So now I know I'm not having a major senior moment. This is at Jim Smothers, right?
But how come there's not much about you on the, because so here's what I've deduced from the internet, right? You're a grandfather, correct?
You mean in terms of family?
Yes.
Okay, I'm the only one. I have no kids.
Okay. So then I'm not as much of a sleuth as I thought I was. All right. So let's move to something that I cannot get wrong. Tell me about Kali in the park.
Kali in the park.
Yeah.
Okay. We had a couple of training sessions when Carl came back. He would go to LA and come back every now and then, and we would have seminars out in Forest Park in St. Louis. that's the only park I think we trained in offhand. We trained a lot in East St. Louis outside. You know, they had little small parks and things like that. But I think the majority of the time it was like in Forest Park in St. Louis. But you know, I really prefer it the way it is because I don't consider myself any noteworthy name in martial. I consider myself mostly very blessed and very lucky. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I picked a very good instructor, Mike Sandlin. One of our students happened to be accepted to go to California back in '72 to learn and brought the material back. As a side note, too, I think it's important to note that the condition that Guru Dan gave Carlton James is that he could teach friends, but he could not officially open a school.
Right.
So when Carl opened up a school, the school that we had was in one of our members' basement. He said he was kind of like, you know, walking a line because this was an official class, but he's kind of stretched a little bit, you know. You know, we had protocol, we had a training curriculum that was pretty consistent, but he wanted to help us because that was his home. So I think when Guru Dan came to St. Louis, they were kind of looking into that. Who had Carl taught? You know, who are the people that taught?
Yeah. So if it was 86, that photograph, if that photograph was 86 and we are in Baldwin, Missouri, this is kind of an obtuse question. But so the picture, Inosano's talking, I'm standing like this, and you're like this. Typical Stan, right? What? It's a ridiculous question, but see if you can answer it. What were you thinking at that stage? If it was 86, do you understand what I'm trying to ask you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What were you thinking?
Okay. If I had this posture, okay, knowing myself, Guru was not talking about technique because that was not the most important thing that fascinated me about Guru Inosano.
Right.
It's like the concepts that he would teach that would tie the movement together, and also the historical perspective that he would bring up from time to time because he studied with so many different instructors.
Right.
He would bring a perspective that's very unique in martial arts because he could tie the relationship not only between one martial art to the other, but between one instructor to the other. And I've never witnessed an instructor being able to have that type of what you would call command of the martial arts, that type of conceptual understanding of martial arts. So that's probably why I was like this, saying, because he's making me think.
Yeah. I get the sense that to you, what you just said there, that connection that he makes between martial art to martial art and instructor to instructor, that is way, way more important to you than almost anything else in what we have been doing these long decades, making those connections.
Yeah, I think one important thing to understand is that when it goes all the way back to Bruce, okay, Sigang Bruce Lee, what has he really left? What's the legacy that he's really left? For me, it's like the liberation and the freedom to research and development. And you can do that in any field.
Right.
But I think martial arts are kind of held back within the homage of tradition to the point that it still has a lot of barriers in order to really go out and really research and find out what's effective, not just combatively, but what's effective for health, what's effective for, you know, philosophically, you know, because you have to cover all the gamuts of it. You know, you can have a brilliant fighter, and I've met many guys that's very good fighters in martial arts, but, you know, in terms of philosophy, and philosophy will gear and direct your behavior, how you approach life. But that part is out of kilter.
Yeah.
Wonderful fighters, tremendous fighters, but then the personal life is just boom. So I always thought, you know, there should be more of a balance. So I think Bruce really spearheaded us to be able to research honestly and sincerely and come up with a better product. And this is why I really admire Guru Inosano, and I think that's the legacy that he's going to leave us. You know?
Yeah. I have a question here on my notes. If you would characterize yourself as an Inosano guy.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. You know, because it implies that I'm merely following. and I don't really consider myself a follower, but I do see the value in that approach, because in that approach, it brings people together. It brings arts together. It makes us research the history, and we can, like I say, we can share, we can exchange better. And I think if you took that problem-solving approach and you apply it in many different fields, you're going to come up with more advancement. Right. And this is what I admire about him. So I'm not a follower or what you would call a fan or fanatic, even though I highly respect him and I honor him for what he's done. But it's kind of like in parallel with what we're trying to do with everything, you know.
Yeah.
Bringing people together.
Because we're in search of totality, right?
Right.
Yeah. Do you think there's another way? If we're talking about the promotion of Jeet Kune Do, the passing on of Jeet Kune Do, right? The teaching and what have you. Do you think that there are other ways that it can be done that nobody has been doing, or that people have been doing but others are not aware of it?
Yes, but then it's such a personal approach, because each individual that studies JKD is going to have their own particular understanding. And I think it depends on the level of understanding. But if you really examine Bruce's life, it was like different stages that he went through. And Guru Dan is very adamant about that, is that if you learn from Bruce a certain number of years, a certain period, right, you're going to get this type of material. But then in the next period, he's elevated it, he's advanced it through R&D, and there's another set of curriculum. And I think he would have continued to do that until he probably, you know, if he lived to be 80 years old. Yeah. Because that was his mindset. Yeah. So, yeah. So I think it's difficult to stop it at one phase and say, you're going to be a traditional JKD. I think that's kind of like, in a way, a contradiction. Right. You know, and as he said, you kind of kill the knowledge. You may keep the knowledge, but you kill the wisdom. Wisdom behind that. You see. Yeah.
Do you think that that functional Jeet Kune Do is a contradiction also?
No, I think functional is really dependent on your measuring stick, how you're measuring it. Like I said, with Mike Sadlin, you know, there was no forms. The kicking was below the waist, you know. So his method would not work in MMA, for example. See? So you got to, I think you have to draw that line functional, but in one type of environment. So yeah, it depends on your definition of what's functional. But then again, you got to always what I would call develop functionality. You know, you may develop something functional at a certain point in time, and then maybe it will start to get weaker because there's more discoveries being made, and if you don't keep up, right? And what you know back in 1984, for instance, right? Look at what we were doing back in 1984 and compare what we're doing now. Yeah,
yeah. Huh. The reason why I asked you about that is because I had a discussion with Cass one time about that, and he says, well, I mean, unless we have lost a part of the art, the term Jeet Kune Do should be synonymous with functional, with realistic, with practical, unless something has come along, right, and diluted our interpretation of what Jeet Kune Do is or should be. You know what I'm saying? Right. Now let's backtrack a second, and because Ken told us a story, but now I want to hear the story from your angle. So I'm this movie director, right, that has two cameras, right? So we get the story about the kicking of the bag in the basement.
Oh, okay, the old college story about that. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So what's the story behind that? Not necessarily him coming downstairs to see where, but how did that bag get there? And what were you doing? What were you doing with it?
You know how the bag got there. You know what I think, Dwight, is that there used to be a karate class right adjacent to that corridor, and I'm thinking probably one of the guys, the karate instructor, may have hung that bag there. And you know, I happened to hang out in that building because I took a lot of classes in that building. So you see a bag hanging there, and you say, well, I'm gonna bring my sweatpants one day and you know, in between classes, practice my kick, you know. Yeah. So Now Ken kind of like dramatizes it a little bit because the sound effect was such that when you hit a heavy bag in that area, I think it was the sound effect, the vacuum in there would make it sound harder than what it really was. It would kind of echo bounce off the walls. It wasn't that powerful.
Yeah, sure. The other thing I wanted to ask you at school, because did you both study psychology, philosophy, and religious studies? Both?
Ken and I, yes, definitely.
Yeah. All three, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so, gosh, how does that factor in to how did that factor in your early Jeet Kune Do days? How does it factor in your present day Jeet Kune Do?
Okay, well, I would describe Ken and I as sort of like we attended college more with a soul searching approach. We were looking for something that we could relate to, kind of like trying to find ourselves. So, if you're taking psychology and philosophy, you're definitely doing some self introspection, right?
Right.
So that I think opened us up to more ideals. So it gave me particularly more openness from Eastern and Western philosophy. You're able to relate to two different and contrasting thought patterns, okay? And it leaves an openness and also a flexibility of mind. So how that affected me then is that it was highly philosophical, but when I met Mike Stanley, he kind of brought me down to earth because he really showed me, okay, no matter what you think, a street fight is going to be very realistic. Either what you have in terms of your skill level is going to work or it's going to get you killed. He was that direct.
Right.
No nonsense. He said you can either do it or you can't do it.
Right.
And I really loved that about the guy. So he kind of brought my philosophy down to earth, more of a practical sense, right?
Yeah. That's absolutely necessary, huh? To bring your philosophy out of the clouds, so to speak, to right in front of you.
Yeah, because you learn how to discern, you learn how to discriminate, you learn how to think, and plus you're open to find out, For instance, my first encounter with Mike, when I saw him teaching 50 people in the gymnasium, my first encounter to ask him to be accepted as a student, he looked at me and said, well, what can you do? And I told him, well, I took a little karate. He said, do you know how to sidekick? And I said, yeah, I learned how to sidekick. So he had two of his students take one of these old elementary chairs, the ones that kind of folded up, open, and you put your books in. They took the books out and they tilted it so the face of the desk, and these two guys on either side is facing me. So Mike told me, your job, Stan, is to kick them off you. They're going to run and ram this desk into you. Your job is to sidekick, kick them off you. Simple. Yeah. Well, naturally, I land on my butt. Then he just looked at me and said, okay, go sit down. That was it. Okay.
Right.
And that was his acceptance. That was my acceptance.
Did you ever do something like that to people who came to you?
I wouldn't dare. See, that you got to remember that was in East St. Louis, where it was pretty rugged in those days.
Yeah.
But it's a different generation now. If you scare people away, I think they're not going to come back.
Right. Yeah. Don't you sometimes wish that you could do things that way?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's always in the back of my head. I'll give you a perfect example. This is a perfect example. At SLU, where the seminars were taking place, there was a recreational center. And I would come and I would do a self-defense class with Ken. We had our separate classes, and sometimes we would joint teach. And there was a young lady there. She couldn't have been more than maybe 20, 21, very petite. I would say maybe about 5'6", maybe about 110 pounds. Okay. And we're doing stick work. And one day I wanted to show them the impact. I wanted them to experience the impact. So we had these Kendo helmets, just the headgear. And I had her put one on, and we just had another guy hit her with a rattan stick. Well, it didn't hurt her, but the reverberation, the shock, gave her trauma. When we took the gear off of her, she was just shedding tears. Yeah. And she walked out, and she stayed away for about, I think, at least 3 weeks.
Right.
Just the shock of experiencing what a hit is.
Right.
Yeah. So.
I scared a girl away from fitness kickboxing with that, because I would always try to incorporate more realistic stuff into our fitness kickboxing. So sometimes we would break out the kick shields. So, you know, sometimes people get scared when they hold a kick shield. So my demonstration that you won't get hurt would be to have somebody hold a kick shield, and then I would smash it with the collie stick. So you'd get that loud reverberation, but it would reveal that the holder didn't feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I had her hold a stick and I slammed it. And same thing, she started crying.
Wow.
But you're better than I am. She never came back.
Oh, okay. Okay. You know, yeah. Well, you know, on this topic, it's interesting because when I look at Guru's Inosanto, and I know he has two types of curriculums. He has a seminar curriculum and he has the academy curriculum.
Yeah.
But he's admitted several occasions that he teaches recreational martial arts.
Right.
Which means they don't have a lot of hard contact in the beginning stages.
Yeah.
He kind of like guides them through step by step until they're acclimated and they're, you know, they're ready to receive it. In the old days, you may get, I have a partner, Norman Travis, on his first day to come to class. I mean, his first day, he sparred one of the heavy hitters in our group. Mm-hmm. But he got so mad that he lost that match, he just got determined, I'm going to come back again. I'm going to get this guy. Right. But that was the mindset back then. But today.
But that's why Norm Travis is still around, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Why aren't there more individuals like that in the world?
Well, I think you have to kind of grow up in a certain environment.
Yeah.
And that could be with the family or it could be just in the community. Because it's something that's kind of like inborn from what you experience. And I don't really think it's anything that they lack because they're going to bring something different. You know, we may have had the physicality and the guts, but what I think we didn't have in my generation, we didn't have the reflective thought or the philosophical understanding or the conceptual understanding. So I think now a lot of people, you come in, maybe even in your class, they will ask you, well, how can you use that? How does it work? Sometimes you get students very inquisitive, but we didn't care about any of that. We just came in and said, well, how can you knock people out? Or how can you?
Right.
Mindset, yeah.
Yeah. You know, another thing that I say from time to time is that my first year at CMAA, Inosanto was not listed as teaching Jeet Kune Do, but it didn't bother me. I wanted to get to the guy. So I didn't really care what he was teaching. I went for the, you know, for the guy, not so. And then when he and Cass broke out double stick, and I was like, wow. I go, I want to learn to move like that. And I never stopped to think, I never had this thought, well, that's not Jeet Kune Do. That's not, you know, Bruce, as people like to say. But it didn't make any difference to me. You know, and I wonder, why do you think that is? That like, why do you think there's some people who are so particular about what is and what is not Jeet Kune Do?
Again, it attributes to the level of understanding, which includes their background and also their motivation. I mean, if you go into martial arts and you're motivated to learn how to defend yourself, that's a different motivation than just coming in with just open curiosity or coming in just to want to gain more, what I would call self-confidence or fame. Some people want to add that to the resume and said, oh, I do martial arts, you know, I'm a singer, I do this. So they just want something for credit, you know, to kind of add on to their self-image. And they may not be willing to pay the dues. But if you come in sincerely to gain the skill, the fighting skill, I think that's more open that you're going to understand that you have to pay a price to get those fighting skills. So you're willing to be trained. But I've had students that have come in from all different spectrums. They come in just out of curiosity. They've seen martial arts movies. I've seen them come in that they've had a fighting background and they really want the skill. They value the skill. They know how important the skill is. And I've had many students come in and say, well, martial arts are popular, so let me learn that so that I can become popular as well. See,
really?
An extra tag to, yes, an extra tag to put on.
Oh my God. You know? I don't think I've ever had that one.
Yeah, they're the sneaky kind. Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint those.
Yeah.
Because they'll kind of train, but they'll kind of like go through the motion.
Right.
And if you put pressure on them to really express themselves, we put more pressure, make it more
Uh,
demanding, then they'll go away for a couple of months and then they'll come back.
right. Hey,
That's
did
like,
you ever see that? Oh gosh, what's the guy's name? George Leonard, the Aikido guy. His article, or he has a book on mastery, but there's also an article from I think it was May of '87 in Esquire magazine, and where he talks about the mastery path, and then all of the people who are on other paths other than the mastery path. Do you know what I'm talking about?
conceptually, but I haven't read that book though. I haven't read that one.
Okay, all right. I think I can find like a PDF of the article or something. I'll send it to you, right? Because he talks about the obsessive, right? So that's the one that comes in that figures if he trains every day for a bunch of hours every day, he'll learn faster and he'll get good faster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but this is the guy who more often than not overtrains and gets hurt and drops out. You know, then he talks about the dabbler. So the dabbler is the guy that comes in, spends some time, drops out, comes back a little while later, spends even a shorter time, right, and drops out again. You know, comes back, spends the shortest amount of time and drops out again, right? So you've got the dabbler, the obsessive. The hacker is the guy that comes in. So I'm describing this wrong. I should start at the beginning. So the mastery path, this is how he shows it. You start out, your level goes up, you plateau, your level goes up again, you plateau, your level goes up, and that is the mastery path. But if I remember correctly, his contention is that a lot of people, they start, their level goes up, but in that plateau, that's the problem part. That's where a lot of people drop out. You know, and I remember my experience of that, and I wanted to ask you about this because you've talked about different types of students and different types of students, but have you ever had a school and trained like full-time professionally? I mean, taught full-time professionally?
No, I was too fearful to do that because from my experience, what I've seen, in order to make that compromise, you end up watering down the art a great deal. Now, I'm not saying that there's exceptions, but once you get into that situation where you're reliant on the money, you know, as your full-time bread and butter, sometimes it can change your mindset. I always love to train for the joy of training. And definitely, I'm not putting myself on any type of scale. You know, if anything, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe I'm a 5 or a 4. But the ideal, I love that freedom. I love that freedom. But I know that martial arts do need full-time instructors. But for me, myself personally, I would be a little bit too leery about going into a full-time where I depend on it full-time.
Yeah. Well, I went into it because the airline job, you know, the airline went bankrupt and went out of existence. And when I went to apply at a second airline, they were like, well, okay, you've got over 10 years, but you're going to have to start at the bottom. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that again. So the only other thing I had was martial arts. So that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up doing, you know, being a full-time professional martial art instructor. That was it. I don't know anything.
Well, I give you all the respect. Okay? Now, that's not an easy path. Okay, I know that's not an easy path. You know.
Yeah, you know, because the decision it was so you know, sometimes I go, well, I didn't make the decision. The decision was made for me. You know, so yeah, I don't regret it at all, not in any shape or form, because there was so much to learn from it. And I look at the guys who, you know, there's some super successful guys in the JKD clan out there. And I look at what they do and how they do things, and there are some slight variations in my approach versus their approach, and I think that's why. But I mean, I was quite successful, but not mega successful like some of these guys have been. And I know why it is that I never broke through to certain heights and what have you. And it was just my stubbornness at not, like I used to tell people, look, I will make concessions, but I will not compromise.
Okay.
You see, to me, there's a big difference. Compromise means giving up values,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So take, for example, the belt. I remember a guy when I was studying business and what have you, there was a martial art guy there, and he said to me, he goes, Dwight, I hear you, but one day you're going to come to me and tell me about the belts, right? I've never done it.
Oh, okay.
I've never done it. But I took all the elements of the ranking system, what the ranking system does psychologically for your students. I get that. But I refuse to use the belt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I took my, let me see if I don't have the magazine here, but I show it fairly often. It's 1988 Inside Kung Fu. And I think it might have been the first time that Bruce Lee's colored ranking system was shown in a magazine.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I just took that and I go, well, that's what we'll do. That's the answer right there. Bruce Lee had a colored ranking system.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to go reinvent anything. It's right there. Just use that.
Mm-hmm.
I am amazed at the number of JKD people who have never done that.
Wow. But they haven't gone to belts, have they?
Yes, they have. Yes,
they have. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So, I you know, sometimes I think that my idealistic stubbornness may have gotten in the way of achieving certain levels, but I don't think I would do it any differently. If I had to do it all over, I don't think I'd do it any differently. It just, to me, thing about Jeet Kune Do is innovation and being out front, so to speak. You know, Bruce Lee was a trailblazer. I think that, therefore, you know, I'm talking too much about what I think. I'm asking you.
No.
I'm talking too much about myself. This is
No, it's interesting. So
no, this is ridiculous.
No.
Let me turn the tables on you. So you have not been out there in the public sphere saying things about Jeet Kune Do. Like I said, we can just barely find you on the internet, right? Can you tell us what you've said in the private sphere about Jeet Kune Do?
Well, from my understanding, you know, from my studies and my understanding, and also I'm heavily influenced by, naturally, Guru Dan Asano, because you got to just give respect that he was Bruce's training partner. So he stuck with Bruce all through the phases that he went through. So he's the final authority in my book, and I can't think of anyone replacing him.
Mm-hmm.
So he mandates that Bruce was on a evolutionary path of research and discovery, and the majority of his training was geared for developing his attributes, not necessarily his students' attributes,
right,
but Bruce's attributes.
Right.
So if you use that as a core understanding, then you know that there has to be an individual approach. So if I have a student, for instance, who has a Muay Thai background, how can I tell him to not do Muay Thai, to not deliver the elbow and kick? If I have a guy who even has a Sabat background, and he shows that he's functional with the Sabat kicks,
yeah.
See, because functionality is the core foundation of everything, I believe, in what Bruce was saying. Mm-hmm. That's why I believe in the phrase he says, express yourself honestly, mm-hmm. truthfully. Yeah. So that means that you are one within you. You know what you can do. You've proven it to yourself, and you can express that openly, freely, without any type of doubt. It doesn't matter who says what. But I think the political aspect comes into play when people's own conception of JKD as a particular style or system. And yes, there was a training system, as Guru Dan says, but that training system was merely steps in an evolutionary path. Because then Bruce would experiment, go back into the laboratory, come back again, and constantly revise based on his research. If we don't understand that point, we're going to take a lot of his wisdom and just bury it. I mean, just the coffin. Okay, and that's what I mean about you preserve information and knowledge, but you bury the wisdom. And I think the wisdom will give you the knowledge if it's, done properly.
Yeah.
But knowledge may not necessarily give you wisdom. In other words, how to use it, appropriately, right?
Right. Yeah. What is when your students ask for reference or research Jeet Kune Do material, where do you send them?
Well, I send them a lot to some of the material. I don't know, some of the material that Amazon used to have on Dan. A lot of it is expensive. But I do emphasize,
Absorb what is useful because of something I was doing today on the internet is $120 on Amazon.
Yeah.
There was a guy had put up a picture from the Fight and Method books. Steve Mosley in England. He put up a picture of Ted Wong and Bruce Lee in the Chisao position with their right leg forward, and he made a comment that that's a departure from the traditional Wing Chun approach. And then that just reminded me of the entire photo sequence in Absorb What Is Useful that shows the 1962 modification, the 1964 to 1968 modifications to that entire thing. So I snapped pictures of them and then I put them up on Facebook, And so Steve Mosley says, yeah, I got to reorder that book because I lent it to somebody. I looked it up, $120.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So sometimes I feel sorry for the younger generation because, there's so much that they have missed out on.
Yeah, but everything balances out if you understand I would think the direction, because each generation has its own direction. So for instance, if this generation uses and really maximizes the use of social media in a productive way, it's going to transform the entire world. It's going to bring up information that we thought is lost. It's going to be able to archive a lot of the information and knowledge that we already have. Just like they do system analysis in the computer field, we can do system analysis even in martial arts. I believe that a lot of systems should be archived, because if you want to preserve the tradition or the history, then we have the technology to do that. But that technology should not prohibit us to keep researching, keep making a better product. So now when you have all this information on YouTube now, all the interviews, all the demonstrations from so many different arts, people are going to naturally start to share information back and forth. They're going to start mixing stuff together. I don't think you can stop that process. I think our generation, probably maybe our role, because I think I'm in the senior role right now, is to try to lend some guidance into the information they pick up, give it more substance so they know how to discriminate and how to discern. But I think they really have a good command on social media. And if they use it in the right way, it can really, bring things together. It can transform.
Do you see them? Do you see anybody out there using it in the right way?
I can't give by name, but when I look at a lot of your interviews, particularly the one with Bunag, the one with Ken, and I think it's another one that I caught, just that portrayal, when you're putting that out to social media, it can really sort of damper a lot of the theory was that, for instance, was Bruce Lee a real fighter or not? There's so much information that goes in the wayside that the young generation don't even pick up.
Yeah.
You read stories like Bruce was just a theater. He was an actor who learned how to kick and became popular. I mean, all kind of absurd theories are out there because people don't have the time to do proper research. So I think, for my generation, the role is that to point them to different information resources and then have discussions about that. And you and I, as well as many others, we can discuss our experiences with Guru and Asana, with other, masters. And I think that will lend a lot more substance to what they're doing. But if you just throw them out to social media right now, you can either become intelligent or you could be dumbed down.
Yeah.
Yeah, both extremes seem to be.
Yeah. One of the things that I deal with on a weekly basis in the different venues in social media that I'm involved with is this idea that mixed martial arts is actually a system. That there is something that you can go study called mixed martial arts. And what I've found is that because of what Dana White said about Bruce Lee being the father of MMA, a lot of people have now come up with this idea that Bruce Lee's system called Jeet Kune Do is a mixed martial art. So in various places, you do hear people referring to Jeet Kune Do as the forerunner of MMA, right? Do you have any comments on stuff like that? Like if somebody asked you, well, Stan, you've been around for a long time. Do you see a connection between Jeet Kune Do and MMA? What's your answer?
Okay, very simply, you try to answer in a way where you spark the students' curiosity and you inspire them to do their research, because they may not necessarily believe or accept the answer that you give them. And I think, like I say, I think discovery sometimes is more important than just information, because you can give information, but if they really want to know, put them to task. Give them certain areas to go and learn, then come back to me and tell me what you've learned. Then I can give you an answer, and then you can discern it. But directly, yes, Bruce Lee influenced everyone. He definitely influenced, but I think you may be misinterpreted if you called him the founder per se, because his direction was not sport oriented.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, I always thought it was quite smart of Dana White to do that, because then you're associating your thing with one of the most influential martial artists of the modern era. So, props to him. And plus, have your students ever asked you about the fight scene in Enter the Dragon with the finger gloves and the Speedos and the submission?
Long time ago. You're talking about a decade ago at least. They look at that. But I always try to be honest with the people that I share my knowledge with, because I have many people I considered my teacher, as well as I help those that I'm sharing the knowledge with.
Yeah.
So I always let them know that I'm giving my perspective to the best of my ability, but there's other people that you can go to give more insight. So I think, it's important to send them on the research path. Say, okay, this is what my instructor says, but, he says to go to look at this guy. It's kind of like what Guru Dan said about some of his colleague instructors. They would sometimes be very open and say, okay, you go and learn from this guy. Right. He's a specialist in double dagger. He's a specialist in, the 30-inch stick or the bahi, the wooden stick, and then they would come back and they would share the knowledge. And I think, that's more beneficial in today's society. I think if you just look at martial arts just combatively, I truly think that you're missing some important facets of it, because we're living in this time where I think we have to broaden our understanding and put more humanity back into the martial arts by looking at the psychology aspect of it. Yeah. And even the philosophical and even the spiritual aspect of it, because, we're losing a lot of our humanity every day. I mean, things that are happening that we're being dumbed down, we're being stressed out, it's like.
But let's say if your primary emphasis or your priority is the combat reality, are you saying that is what has to be balanced out, or that should not be the priority, or can that lead to a deeper spiritual or psychological understanding?
Well, I remember when Bruce did an article, I think it was Penthouse, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm mistaken, I apologize. They did an article. This came out after his death. And he made a statement that, JKD is not defeating the opponent in front of you, but defeating your own ego.
Mm-hmm.
But it was profoundly philosophical. So the idea, let's say you're on the path of martial arts training and you develop a high level of skill. You know you can defend yourself. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then the question is, where do you go from there? Does your quest end it at that point? I don't think so. I think if you improve anything to become a better person, you can start to expand that in different areas. So I think we're going back to the original. When we think of martial art tradition, the martial arts master, traditionally, he was also a master maybe in calligraphy, healer.
Right.
He was more, multi,
faceted.
talented. Yeah, than just this one thing.
Yeah. So do you have because there are people out there, again, in the internet sphere who talk about the demise of Jeet Kune Do. Do you agree with that?
No, because you're one of the stalwarts that's keeping it alive, and there's other people that's keeping it alive. Guru Inasano and Paul Bunek, Cass, all these guys. I think it's going through another stage of maybe revamping or readapting because the climate or the environment is slowly changing.
Right.
So as Bruce always said, we have to kind of adapt to the changes that's going on now. You look at the psychosis that's going on now, mental illness. How do you fight that with combat? Even if everybody was armed with their own pistol. I mean, when the violence becomes to a point where it becomes completely psychotic and inhumane, how do you fight that with violence? How do you fight that with... See, there's a stage where you have to sit back and say, how come this is happening?
Mm-hmm.
I've had one person, I won't mention by name, that's had several hundred fights. And I think Bunek brought this point up. If you're training and you have several hundred fights, what does that say about you as a person? Are you seeking these,
Yeah.
These, so yeah, it has to be kind of balanced out. That's my main.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you had to, I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you, in your career, if you've ever done this, if you had to encapsulate into a statement what Jeet Kune Do is, can you pull that out? What would you say?
I could put it out in one word. The word that has the most priority for me would be liberation. Because see what Bruce was doing in terms of breaking out, being the only Chinese or the first Chinese to teach any race, to be the one who was, particularly at that age that he was so young, to be able to challenge the mold and break that barrier. I think the first stage, you liberate yourself. And then if you know your trajectory, your path that you want to go on, what you want to accomplish,
mm-hmm.
okay, it's going to make it easier,
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you my most proudest moment. This may seem very odd and bizarre, but my proudest moment as a teacher is when I had a college professor bring his daughter to me. His daughter was about, I think, 15 or 16 years old. He says, this is what he says with his daughter next to him. He says, my daughter is extremely shy. She's introverted. She doesn't have any friends. She sits at home every day. She goes to school, come back. And while he's explaining this to me, his daughter is not even looking at me. She's looking at the floor. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm saying, well, I teach martial arts, but I can't, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist.
Right.
I can't promise to change, her behavior. But for some reason I said, yeah, can't promise, but I'll see what we can do. So when she started training, doing the stick work, the boxing, all the trapping, everything in the curriculum, within about 6 or 7 months, I saw her personality just blossom. She started telling jokes in class. She started making friends in class.
Wow.
She even had a boyfriend who was in the Muay Thai class, Ron Smith's Muay Thai class. They started dating. So I looked at that and said, whoa, it's more than what I think, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah. Because I think that's one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised by. The fact that Jeet Kune Do can end up being a vehicle for well-rounded development, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, whatever. That was one of my most serendipitous discoveries. Because I did not experience that as a kid growing up in martial art in Barbados. Not really.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't see that. What are there any other surprises for you in the time that you've been in JKD? And what role does Kali play in all this? Because I found a picture of you with a sword and dagger, and I also found a logo that I think it said Stanley Brooks Martial Arts Movement.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. So is there a role, because there's still people out there that criticize the whole Kali is not Jeet Kune Do thing or what have you. As somebody like me, influenced by Inasano, what role has Kali played in your development?
Okay, when Carl was studying Jun Fan under Guru Inasano, he would come back and he first trained us in the focus club, the punching and the kicking, the basic danchi, chisao, and the basic trapping. So we had a set curriculum. Then he came back after a couple of months and he introduced us to the double stick and the single stick. So from that moment on, I made the association that they're related. I never in my mind thought these were two different arts, because I figured, well, even with Jun Fan, Goose took from different, from Western boxing and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, so that helped me a lot. But in terms of martial arts movement, that's a very power-packed question, because when I started learning universal energy back in 1992, in 1998, I kind of took a vacation from martial arts, because I started doing the energy heavily, traveling around the world to attend seminars in the healing method.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started teaching back in 1993, student teaching in 93 or 94. And I was actually able to be a co-director of our healing center in the south side of St. Louis. And I would only teach if I had some staff member who was kind of interested, but practically nobody knew at that time I was even doing martial arts, because I never talked about it.
Right.
I never really practiced in front of anybody. So I came back after the center closed, and Ken is such a good friend. He said, well, Stan, you don't have any students, right? So I sent 2 of my students. So he sent 2 of his students so I could practice, start teaching. And I got back, that was about maybe 8 years ago, and I got back into the swing. So I didn't want to use the term JKD, and this is more just my personal touch on it. So I wanted to use a more generic term. Mm-hmm. So I thought of martial arts movement, and at that time I didn't know there's about 6 or 7 other groups using that same word.
Oh, really?
Martial arts movement the other day. I thought I was the only one, because truly I came up with it on my own, right? Okay, but anyway, yeah. But Kali, again, with the connection with, Jun Fan due to Guru Inasano's influence, is just a part of it. It's a direct link to it.
But there are people who are going to argue that with you. There's always one enduring argument. It's not really an argument. It's just an expression of an idea. Is the thing about Jeet Kune Do being Western boxing, fencing, and Wing Chun, right? Now, you're not on the internet as much as I am, so you might not be aware of that whole contention. But to this day, there's still that thing that Inasano's bringing Kali into it was one of those watering downs of the JKD.
I honestly think that was a discussion or debate that should have been resolved maybe 15 years ago. And this is something that I feel very, it really should have, because the ultimate authority on JKD at this time that we know is Guru Dan Inasano. That's the ultimate authority.
Yeah.
And when Bruce passed away, I remember Guru mentioning that when he went back to started teaching Bruce's techniques to his class, he said they did not have the attributes. So this is why he went into the Kali stick work to help build their attributes. So there's a function and purpose behind it. Plus the other fact is that when Guru Inasano shared with us that he was getting frustrated with the Filipino instructors because they had no systematic outline that most other arts were, that Bruce was the one that encouraged him to keep learning. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that Bruce was well aware that at some time Guru was going to incorporate the stick training, but incorporate it for what purpose? It's to develop your attributes.
Right.
It's not stylistic, and I think that's the problem that people think is they're looking at it from a stylistic and technical point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say that our Kali is JKD tinged, you know, right? And that yeah. So sometimes I'm a little bit bemused when people talk about the Lacoste Inasano system or the Inasano Lacoste system and what have you, when I'm fairly sure that you remember when he would say stuff like, okay, so I'm showing you, I'm using techniques from this system, but the approach, the training method is from this other system.
Exactly.
And then we're using terminology for it from this third system.
See, I consider that as Bruce's genius that was handed down to Guru Inasano.
Yeah.
And if people don't recognize that, I think that they kind of miss a major point.
Yeah.
That's the genius that Bruce had.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
to be able to extract that. Yeah.
So where can people find out more information about you, but specifically about the HU, the human universal energy?
Okay. I'm teaching privately at this time, but I sincerely wish to introduce the healing to all my martial arts family.
Okay.
Because I've had a lot of martial arts instructors who've just fallen sick. Some of them just, you know, they died suddenly, heart attack or whatever.
Right.
So health is such a predominant issue now. But they can find me. I have my Facebook and also an Instagram. I'm having a few of my students who are more social media expertise, they're helping with that. But, you know, on my own, I probably wouldn't be this accessible. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram and so forth. And I'm happy to share, you know.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, look, I thank you for sharing. It's been great to catch up with you, man. I mean, it's so funny, right? You told me that you had told people, oh, check out this guy Dwight Woods on YouTube. Right?
Yeah, I'm looking at you teaching a numerata class, and I'm saying this is interesting. Didn't know who you were. That's
right.
Yeah.
And I saw Stanley Brooks on and I think it came up as a friend request, right? So, you know, so I clicked it, and then I'm like, yeah, whoever it's that. And then I looked at it carefully, and I go, holy crap! So yeah, so I'm real glad that we, you know, we're able to make this connection. And if everything works out, I'll see you guys early next year, huh? In the that seminar thing.
Oh yeah, that'd be good. I'm looking forward to seeing you, man. And, yeah.
All right.
Bring a lot of material with you, a lot of old memorabilia. Okay.
All right, man. Well, look, it was good to meet up with you, and I'll definitely stay in touch.
Okay, love you, brother.
All right.
Good.
Okay, man. You take care. Bye. Okay, there you have it. Stan Brooks of Combat Jeet Kune Do. Lost boy. That's it for today. Feel free, share, like, comment. Again, ask questions. If Stan doesn't answer stuff that you could, I'll try to pass it on to him and get him to give you an answer. I'll review everything after we post. Sign up for notifications for when we go live here on Facebook, but also for when we post the final edit videos on the YouTube for the Jeet Kune Do dialogues, for the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast, and also for the new, we got another episode coming up very shortly of the FMA files. Follow me on Twitter at Dwight Woods, on Instagram at Dwight D. Woods. Quick heads up, at ilovejeetkundo.com. The Quick Skills series is still available, volume 1. Coming up on the next episode of the Jeet Kune Do dialogues, that'll be this Friday, August 23rd. Will be with Cameron Rico. This is a name that came up a while ago, but it's taken us some time to put it together, and I'm pretty sure that he has confirmed for Friday, August 23rd at 6 p.m. Some of you I'll see on Wednesday for an issue of the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast, right? And so I'll see you back here next time. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.